everyone, my name is Shara Guarnaccia, and I'm going to be telling you about the Chilean student movements of 2011. So I'm going to start by showing you an example of some of the protests that the students put on. So in the summer of 2011, which was their winter, the students performed a flash mob in front of the White House of Chile, La Moneda, in which they danced to the song Thriller by Michael Jackson. And this was sort of representative of the students' feelings that the education system is now walking dead in Chile. This is just one example of alternative protests that the students put on in the summer of 2011 and later in that year. Here, I'll show you the video now. There were about 3,000 students who gathered on that day to dance in support of this education movement. And as I was saying, this was an effort on the students' part to refocus the media's attention away from the violence within the movement. They were trying to actively have a nonviolent protest against the government. It was also a way for them to protect themselves from police repression and the possibility of being arrested in more formal marches and other forms of demonstrating. Some of the other alternative protests surrounded the number 1,800, which was symbolic of the $1.8 million that the students were asking from the government. So they ran around La Moneda for 1,800 hours, the equivalent of 75 days. And later in the year, they held a national kiss-in. I had the opportunity to observe and participate in this movement when I studied abroad in Chile in the fall of 2011. The slogan of the movement, which you can see here on the main building of the University of Chile, was free public education for all. So Chile has one of the most unequal education systems in the world. In addition to the public and private schools that we know here in the United States, they have this third type of school. And this school both receives a government subsidy and can charge families tuition. So the students complain that these schools draw resources and students away from the public school system, and also that they're able to make profit off of government money. So profit is a central complaint of the students within the movement. They're also asking for the re-centralization of the education movement to get rid of inequality that's caused by municipal control. And they're very upset the amount of debt that students are required to incur in order to get a quality education. The 2011 student movement grew out of a smaller and shorter movement in 2006. Called the Revolución Pingüina, or the Penguin Revolution, for the high school students' uniforms, this movement was started when high school students took to the streets asking for a repeal of the general education law, which was put in place in 1990 by Pinochet, who was a dictator from 1973 until 1990. He took power in a military coup when he ousted the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende. And so this is one of the two legacies that Pinochet left that's very relevant to the 2011 movement. In addition to this education law, he also had institutionalized brutal, violent repression of any form of dissent. So in 2006, while this first movement was going on, but Michelle Bachelet, who was considered the most liberal president since Pinochet was in power. And even so, when these high school students started marching in the street, she used police force against them, which led them to take over their schools in what they called tomas, coming from the Spanish word tomar, which means to take. So they occupied their schools. And this became a central element of the 2011 movement as well. So as you can see here, the students would put chairs in the front of their school to show the society that their school was taken over. And the students lived in their school for 6 months, effectively stopping classes, which put pressure on the municipal governments because they weren't able to receive the government subsidy based on attendance. It was also a place that they could organize themselves for other forms of demonstration, hold cultural events, and other informal classes. The Tomas also provided a space for the students to enact the type of power structure that they wanted to see both in the education system and in Chilean society more generally. Everything was decided via assembly, power was very horizontal, things were done via democratic processes, and the students had a lot of responsibility both in taking care of their schools and in making sure that anything they wanted done was accomplished. They reconceptualized the school as a place for the students, run by the students. But this was just one element of the movement. In addition, they held mass marches in which it really showed the real accomplishment of the students in 2011. Unlike 2006, this was not just a high school movement, but the university students, teachers, families, and the community came out to support the students. So in the fall of 2011, there was a family march in which over 1 million people gathered in a park in Santiago in support of the student movement, asking the government to reform education. And this is so significant because this is the first time since the dictatorship in the 90s that Chilean society went out in the streets en masse to protest and demand something from the government without fear of this violent repression. But the students weren't just in this for quick fixes and easy compromises. They didn't just want to reform the education system. At the base of their sort of platform, they also were looking to change the way that private enterprise and business play a role in Chilean society. And so just last week, over 100,000 people marched again in Santiago in support of this education reform. And so as you can see, the students have reconceptualized the way that society thinks of themselves as civic actors and their efficacy. They've changed the way that the students relate to the schools and the students and teachers relate to one another. But really only time will be able to tell us how these grassroots changes will be able to institutionalize themselves and become part of the systems of Chile. Thank you.